Hey everyone, welcome to this month's Coach Developer Conference call from U.S. Center for Coaching Excellence. And my guest today will be Kristi Erdal. She's the chair of the Department of Kinesiology, I think. We're going to check on that and make sure I got the title right at Colorado College here in lovely Colorado Springs. So she is just down the road from me in our lovely town here. So a couple of announcements before we get started. Get my mouse to work here. Most of you probably know the recordings are available there on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play. Every time I beg people to subscribe and leave a review, and that really helps other people connect to the podcast. Perhaps it then pops up as if you're listening to John O'Sullivan's podcast, and this will pop up as a recommendation and try to get the word out. A few things about upcoming events is the iCoach Kids EU, as I mentioned in the call with Sergio Bercial last month, they have a MOOC course that's now open. It just opened, I think, on Friday, and it's developing effective environments for youth sport. I encourage everyone to check that out. The conversation with Sergio got me really excited about some of the things that iCoach Kids is doing, and so that's available now. And also, for those of you who are going to listen to this later, sorry you missed this party, but the USOC ADM and Youth Sports Symposium is beginning on December the 11th, and most of you, hopefully on my mailing list, received the announcement about the pre-conference networking tonight at Red Leg Brewing Company here in Colorado Springs. Just a little chance for folks to get together and do a little socializing before we go into the formal conference on Tuesday afternoon. And then my always plug here for the USCC Coach Developer Summit coming up again here in Colorado Springs, June 17th through 19th. And registration is now open for that, and you can register and find more information at the uscoachexcellence.org website. I've got 2 conference calls in the works for January and February, and once I have those nailed down, I will let you know. Pretty excited about both the calls. I'm just not sure who is going to be in January and who's going to be in February at this point, and so stay tuned for that. And as always, if you are live and you're online, if you want to chat during or send me a question or comment during the presentation, if you hit the little chat bubble up there. And if not, I've got the Q&A queue open. I'll see your question there. If you punch in the proper buttons, the #6, then give you a chance to answer questions at the end. And with that, I'm going to stop rambling now and bring Kristi Erdal on. Kristi is the author of a new book that's out, The Adulteration of Children's Sports. And I'm sorry, she is the psychology department chair at Colorado College. I don't know why I had kinesiology in my head. Sorry.
Well, you know what? You got a hybrid there, because I'm a professor in the psychology department and I'm chair of human biology and kinesiology. So it's a little complicated.
That's where I got that. Well, I don't feel quite so bad that I just pulled something out of thin air. All right. Well,
exactly. No, there was some basis in fact. Yeah.
Well, that's good. Sometimes I'm concerned that things I say don't have a basis in fact. So with that, as you can tell, Kristi is on the line here, and her research interests include concussion, superstition, and stereotyping. And actually, the superstition one is the one that first brought you on my radar screen. I heard an interview with you probably a couple of years ago now on some research that you and one of your students did on kind of superstition, and also on I think it had to do with, what was that, the golf experiment that the student did?
Yeah, it was on sports superstition, and we created an in-lab way of assessing superstition, which is usually, of course, just out there in the natural environment. And so we built basically a golf putting range in one of our classrooms, and we created an experiment where the students who came in did a difficult putt or a hard putt, and we assessed their superstition by whether they used the same color ball after a made putt. And so, yeah, so it was a quantitative way of assessing superstition, and came up with some really interesting results that low-skilled golfers, like myself, for instance, would only have superstitious behavior on the easy putt, because that's the only one they even had a chance of getting. And the high-skilled golfers like other people, they would use superstitious behavior on the difficult putt because there was the easy putt was, of course, too easy for them. It was a no-brainer. But the difficult putt still had some variability in it. And so we found this beautiful interaction between skill level and superstitious behavior. So that was really fun.
Very neat and very fun. But we brought you on to talk about your book because, everybody wants to get their book out there and to have, people read it. And you and I talked about this when I first interviewed you for the other podcast I did on this. It was
right.
You had notes and things everywhere, and you had a draft or something. So it's kind of fun to see this thing come to life. From my end, I can't imagine what it was like on your end to,
Oh, sure.
Process.
It's a really long process. This is my first book. Usually I publish academic articles in journals, which are taxing, but they're typically quite shorter. And so I'm synthesizing basically all of the research conducted on children's sports up through 2017 was quite a task. And yes, you did see the notes in my office and all of the binders and things like that. And now finally it's culminated into a text, as you mentioned, The Adulteration of Children's Sports, and the post-colon title is Waning Health and Well-Being in the Age of Organized Play. And it's published by Lexington, which is a division of Rowman and Littlefield Publishing, and they've been fabulous in publishing the text.
Well, and two things with that, and I'll put a link in the show notes, but you have offered a publisher's discount to folks, and I will have a link to that. So thank you, and thank Lexington for that. And also, your publisher has a deal with the U.S. Center for Coaching Excellence. They are working on developing some content, some books on writing on sports, and I'll put a link into more information if anybody's interested in doing that. And that was just happenstance, to be honest with you. I knew about this with the USCCE, and I saw that. I never put them together. So there's a good synergy here, if I can use that somewhat overused word right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's get into this.
But I do feel like you followed this path when during the first podcast interview you saw all the notes, and now it's come to fruition. So it's a nice full circle moment here.
It is. There's some closure to this. Great. Well, let's talk about the book. You said it includes research up through 2017. So what inspired you and motivated you to write a book about this topic?
Right. I think that's actually probably one of the most interesting questions, because I've been a professor here at Colorado College. It's my 23rd year. I'm a clinical psychologist by training and a clinical neuropsychologist by specialty. So my only forays really my beginning forays into sport interests were concussion testing. And I was a college athlete myself, so of course I had inherent personal interest in sport in general, but concussion testing was really how I entered in. Then my students oftentimes were athletes as well, and they wanted to do their theses in sport-related things. I developed a sports psychology class, which here at a liberal arts college is not a performance enhancement class. It's looking at basically life through the lens of sport. And so I have this sports psychology class going, and I spend one day on the block plan, which is about a week in a semester, on youth sports. So I'm up on the research, but not necessarily a specialist. And then my kids, who are now grown, started children's sports. And I looked at the literature, and I looked at what was happening on the ground, and the Venn diagrams weren't overlapping at all. And I was really kind of shocked at what was being said and done on the ground in children's sports, and then looking at the literature and seeing so much of it, in fact, antithetical to the health and well-being of children. And so basically what I started doing was kind of going back to the literature and saying, all right, well, maybe there's some disconnect here. And the more I looked, the more I realized that I was in kind of a unique position. I have access to all, as a faculty member, I have access to all the research in physiology and psychology and sociology, and I felt kind of a responsibility to put it all in one place for academics, for parents, for coaches, for sport administrators, probably the linchpin group in this, to say, okay, what's happening on the ground is not supported by research and for the health and well-being of children. And so if you are interested in supporting the health and well-being of children, here's your Bible. Here's everything you need to know to say what is factual and what is not factual. Because there's so many myths, as you well know, out there about children's sports that people who perhaps are motivated by financial interests will tell you about specialization and about early training and travel teams and all of that, and none of it has support in data.
Well, and the question I want to start with is, how did this all get started? How did this become an industry?
Yeah, that's really an interesting question that I found quite compelling to try to answer. So I looked into, and this is really a sociological question more than anything else, because how does a society, which is what we have done, change where a generation ago, now I'm in my 50s and you're a little bit younger, but we played outside, we organized ourselves, we went to the sandlot or the playground, we brought our own bats, we made our own rules, there were no uniforms, all of those things was a generation ago. And now we're in a completely different place where that sort of sandlot play, independent play, hardly exists at all. And what I was very intentional in titling this book, The Adulteration of Children's Sports, of course, for the double entendre of the word adulteration. Mm-hmm. So adulting the sport, but adulteration means basically making weaker and dissipating. And so there's a lot of things that my generation, earlier generations, learned through play. And even if we organized ourselves, organized play, but children's organized play, that the kids of this generation are not getting. And so why? Okay. So our generation now as parents are acting very differently from the way our parents did. We were basically kicked out of the house, don't come back till dinner, or the lights go on or whatever,
exactly.
Over the summer. And now there's hardly a handful of parents you can find who would be like that. Everyone has to be supervised. So I looked into the sociological literature and said, why is that? And it seemed like in the late 80s, early 90s, the advent of play dates and safety concerns about children started rising. You might say, why? Why is that? Well, one theory is that the media representation of things like abductions and bullying and things like that got more and more media play, more and more channels on the TV at that time, more and more cable, then it was the internet, and then information that was always more local now became more global. And so safety issues, concerns rose, even though safety problems didn't rise. And so parents figured more and more that they need adults to supervise their children. They don't want their children getting hurt. They don't want their children getting abducted or maltreated. They don't want their children, having negative experiences. Now, all of those, the abductions and even injuries were very low frequency events. And in fact, many would argue that they're higher frequency now that more adults are in more contact with children. So some of these have been misguided problems. But in fact, it seems like the safety issue rises to the surface whenever parents are asked why they prefer adult supervised or organized play over letting their children be independent, roam free, set their own rules, and play with each other.
That's fascinating. And by the way, you and I are very much contemporaries, but I appreciate the fact that you think I'm younger than you are. And I grew up in that same sort of environment of the joke at my house was be home at dark 30, which was 30 minutes after it became dark. And okay.
Right. So you could find your way. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that was just, kind of part of it. And okay, so, parents started becoming more started organizing their kids' lives a little bit more, and I think that everybody knows the stories, and probably everybody knows the parents who are, just kind of at this point, even in some cases, glorified Uber drivers, and who are, hauling kids all around and have to have every minute of their kids' days organized. Then out of that, where did this, maybe if you can talk about the development of the club sports and how they became so much more prominent now than in my small town of 25, 30,000 people, there were no club sports. It was all recreation department, boys and girls clubs, and then the high school, of course, that division, much like everywhere. But where did this club system all of a sudden begin to really explode?
And you know what's interesting, when you look at the research there, because there's research involved in this, where did all this stuff come from? There's a lot of finger pointing. Parents are finger pointing at the club sports, and the club sports are finger pointing at the parents. And if you think about it, they're probably both right. The parents, if you have greater concerns for safety and you want adults running your children's lives, including yourself, it's hard for parents to understand what the goals of children's sports were for children. Okay, so it's hard to remember what you were like at 5 or 7 or 9 or even 12 to say, why did I go out and play? You went out and play to play. You didn't go out and play to win. You went out to play and get exercise and run around and have friendships and negotiate things and do all of that. And so now when parents are running this play, if you will, quote unquote, their goals are what they see sport as adults. Uniforms and structure and rules and winners and losers, of course. And so that when you get parents trying to dictate children's play, by definition, adults can't put themselves back into their childhood bodies and say, why did I do this? Or their childhood minds, why did I do this? And they're seeing sport through the lens of how adults see sport, as winners and losers and rigid and organized and rules, and you have to do it right and you have to throw it the right way and things like that. So on that one hand, when parents became interested in organizing their children, just the cognitive disconnect of what play is plays a role. And now you have, of course, in this beautiful entrepreneurial capitalistic society, you have people who are more than willing to look at those safety concerns and say, we will alleviate those safety concerns for you parents, send your children to us, and we will give them a safe space, and we will teach them a sport, and then we will throw all the myths of sportsmanship and self-esteem and all of that stuff that actually doesn't have much data to support it, and we'll throw all of those words in too, and we will take care of your children. And the parents are saying, great, fabulous. Are you going to have leagues? Are you going to have cute uniforms that I can take pictures of? Are you going to teach my kid the right rules of this game? Again, not understanding necessarily what play before the age of 13 or prepubescent play is supposed to be. And so, of course, the people who are running these organized sports arenas are saying, well, of course we're going to do that. If that's what you want, that's what we'll do. And there's a lot of recreational professionals who say, we know we shouldn't be doing that, but that's what the parents want, and that's what they're going to pay for. And so I think of this sometimes, and I write this in one of my last chapters, that wouldn't it be nice if the recreational professional sport administrators took the opportunity to have teachable moments to the parents at this point and say, we could give your child a mini professional version of sport, or we could give them safe venues to play and organize themselves and play tag and give them things to hide under and, things like that. So I liken it to when in the recent decades when pediatricians were pressured by parents to give their children antibiotics, for colds and ear infections and things that are likely virus. I liken it to that, where pediatricians took the pressure and overprescribed antibiotics, and then we got into a really nasty place where we have, drug-resistant bacteria and things like that. But now the pediatricians have taken back a little bit of power, tried to turn that ship around and say, no, that's not good for your child, even if you think it is. And I liken it to the same thing, where recreational professionals and sport administrators to say, you know what, you say you want this, but that's not good for your child. How about we provide this instead?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'm at.
I think that's interesting, and I do. I think there's a lot of the rec sports folks out there who do get it, and I think it kind of goes back to this. You talk about, the entrepreneur and capitalism part is that, within reason, that rec sports person is going to get their salary. If 20 kids come out and play, or 200 kids come out and play in the soccer league, they're going to get paid. If 2,000 kids come out, they're still going to get paid. So they're motivated by going, I got other. Then you got to make budget. You got to do all that stuff. I think we all get. But okay,
right.
So my goals can be very different. It's not trying to get the kid, to do this 12 months out of the year, because when they go over and play some other sport, that's money going to some other club coach or whatever. And I think there's issues with that, where when I grew up I'm sure there are club sports out there. Just reading historically, I know it, but certainly not in my small town. There were not.
No, and there weren't very many. There weren't very many, for sure.
No.
That has increased exponentially with some of the myths that have increased, where people will, to be honest, when I've been writing this book and, over several years, and every time I mentioned it to someone, there was a story that came back to me. And, people on the street, people at conferences, people not related to sport issues at all would say, oh, I know a kid who was told that they need to do this, and then they got, this injury and the elbow surgery and, all of that. So there's hundreds of thousands of stories out there about how early specialization and all-year participation is problematic. And what I put in the book is all the data that says, you're absolutely right, parents, anecdotes, you're absolutely right that these myths that children need to participate early and pick a sport, and it's completely unfounded. And the myths of year-round participation, completely unfounded, in fact, completely antithetical to the health of the children.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue into my next question is, what are some of the negative outcomes that you found in this adulteration process?
Right. Well, that is Chapter 3, if you're interested. It's called The Negative Impact of Organized Sport on Children. And the subtitle is this: when adults get it wrong, sport leads with trophies and pressure and ends with dropout. Okay, so that's the subtitle of Chapter 3. And what really I go through is the literature involved in looking at given that adults are organizing sport for children, what are the problems that we're seeing now that we didn't see when children organized themselves? So that's the comparison, okay? And what we're seeing is, in fact, poorer motor skill development, poorer social skills, less independence, less learning conflict resolution, not surprising if the adults are doing all the conflict resolution for you, more extrinsic motivation, that is, I want to do it for the trophy and the ribbon and the accolades rather than I want to have fun with it. Nutritional problems, if we're adultifying, and that was your word, I remember, from a couple of years ago. If we're adultifying children's sports, I'll give you credit on that. If we're adultifying children's sports, we are bringing the concession stand in with the hot dogs and the French fries and things that we would do at a Major League Baseball game, and we're not showing children appropriate nutrition for athletes. All of that is accelerating. There's actually, in this chapter, there were 2 places where I had to sit back and go, holy smokes, because these other things that I just mentioned, if you really think about the generational difference in children's sports, you think, okay, clearly they have less independence if adults are doing everything for them. Clearly they're not going to learn conflict resolution if the adults are doing everything for them. Clearly, if we're feeding them with trophies and ribbons, that's going to be a problem. And then there were two other places where I kind of sat back and went, holy. One was having lower moral development. And that was a series of studies by Breda Meyer and her colleagues that looked at kids who played organized sports, particularly boys and particularly contact sports, but it wasn't just limited to that, where their moral development was lagging from when compared with kids who didn't play sports. And if you thought about it, some very interesting theorizing can come out of that, is if you are relying on outside people like officials to tell you what is right and wrong from an early age, that probably has an impact on where you think you're responsible for your own moral actions. And that was
Wow.
a really compelling, I mean, think about it. It makes perfect sense, even though we don't like to really think about it that way. And, sport, you can have discussions, and my students and I have discussions all the time about whether, framing a pitch in baseball is ethical or not ethical, whether if you're calling the tennis balls out on your own, rather than having an official there, do you try to hedge, do you try to, and a lot of the students will say, well, hey, if the ref didn't see it, it wasn't wrong. That sort of thing. These are college students that I'm talking to. And so, that's what sport teaches you, I'm sorry to say, in many of the sports where if the official didn't see it, it didn't happen. And that was jarring to me, that what we might be losing in a generation where officials are telling you what is right and wrong, and you're trying to push the envelope or push the boundary, that there might be a moral dilemma later on in how you act or react in other situations. So that was one. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I was going to say it's fascinating because it's made me think of when I was a kid. Again, free play. We made up games.
Right.
We just made crap up. I mean, there was no name for this. We just we adjusted rules depending on how many people we had, and also how old we were. If we had a little kid, we adjusted the rules because the 8-year-old was there when we were 12. But the other thing that jumped out at me, and even though the odds are that he would never hear this, I won't use his name, but we had a kid in our neighborhood who he cheated, or at least he wasn't very good at, like, when we played basketball, if you breathed on him, he'd call foul on you, kind of thing.
Right.
Well,
right.
Our punishment for him was we just didn't invite him to play.
Exactly.
And one of
that
my
was
other
natural
friends,
feedback.
It was, and one of my other friends told him, said, "Why didn't you guys call me?" He goes, "We don't like playing with you, man. I mean, it's just you're not playing the game. You're. Well, I don't think we call him a cheater or anything like that. And he wasn't really cheating. It's just like, if you don't do that, you're no fun to play with, and you're ostracized. In which case,
you're no fun to play with.
You're no
that's
fun
it.
to play
you're
with.
no fun to play with.
Yeah,
because that's what play is supposed to be.
Yeah, I had not thought about. I hadn't thought about that particular person probably in years with that. Now, well, that's an interesting one. I mean, and we see that, we talk about that with that conflict resolution and part of it learning it. And now, at some point in time as an adult, if you don't learn that somewhere, and a lot of us learned it in sport, then how are you going to manage in the workplace or when they get to college and there's conflicts with roommates?
Right. And it's not like sport is the only place where you can learn conflict resolution, but I think the replacement of children learning it themselves and seeing adults do it for them, okay, that's more the problem. It's not like, kids who didn't play sport never learned conflict resolution, but it's the replacement of you doing it yourself with adults doing it for you on the athletic field. And that's a difference. Because you can learn conflict resolution in the orchestra and the, whatever else, but it's a matter of who's doing the conflict resolution and who's giving that feedback, that natural feedback to your childhood friends saying, we don't want to play with you because you don't have the same rules in your head that we do. And we're trying to tell you that this is how we're playing it here on the sandlot and giving you that feedback so you can be part of the game. And what you said before about having little kids and older kids play together, that's not dangerous. That's actually, older kids learn to be gentler with little kids and give them handicaps and do-overs and whatever else we want to call that. That's about learning what we would call in psychology theory of mind, putting myself into that 5-year-old's shoes. That 5-year-old wants to play, but he can hardly lift up the bat. How are we going to incorporate him in the game? And putting yourself into the 5-year-old's shoes and say, how can he be part of the game? Can he be a pinch runner? Can he be, having that sort of ability to stretch cognitively as an older child to bring the game into other kids. And vice versa. So I think all of those things that you're talking about anecdotally have research support, where if you're just playing with kids who are within a few months of your own age and all are being instructed on how to do things, there's no independent thinking, because of the coach. And all the plays are called by the coach, and all the defenses are called by the coach. You're just a pawn, and that there are a lot of researchers who use that term very intentionally. That children are just pawns of adult coaches, and again, if you think about it, it's hard to argue against that.
Well, and my take on this too is I was a college administrator in the late '80s and early '90s, and then left that world and pursued this area, and I still have friends who are in higher education administrators, and one of their constant complaints is, my God, these kids they can't solve. They're always running to an adult, and by definition, you're a college kid. You're an adult at this point,
Right.
And so,
right.
And so they're running to them, or in the workplace, they're running to HR to whine about the person who's cubicle next to them. They're playing their music too loud, and it's like, well, I would just walk around and tell Connor, hey, can you turn your music down a little bit or something like that, but. And somewhere I learned that. No one told me just to go up and do it, but it was innate. But now it seems like, and maybe it's some of this, that the adults are so quick to jump in and resolve conflicts. And that could happen in the band or the orchestra as well. And you take that ability away from that when the kid is let loose in the world, and I would even consider college to be part of that world, of learning that conflict resolution and how do I deal with other people and people who have a different outlook on life. Well, I always listen to music loud. I didn't realize it was impacting
and to be honest, your friend who was playing by a different set of rules, wouldn't it be interesting to sit down and say, why do you think that's a foul when nobody else does? Having that conversation. And maybe that's a little heady for 8-year-olds, but but there's another associated thing here too that I found. This was the second of the findings that kind of jarred me when I was looking at the negative outcomes. One was having, and this is not surprising, having less tactical creativity in sport. Okay, if a coach is telling you what to do and when to do it, you don't develop a sense of the game yourself. And that seems like, okay, that seems obvious. If you're not allowed to free play and figure out new creative ways to kick this ball and hit this and run around here, then of course your tactical creativity is going to diminish. But some of this research followed these kids, athletes, into adulthood and also found that their creativity in other venues was also decreased. So the more they played organized sport, the less creative they were in other venues, and other tests of creativity that have nothing to do with sport. And one of them even calculated out to an algorithm, which was, which I love as a quantitative person. Not many people love that, but an algorithm of how many hours in their childhood lives would they have had to increase in free play to get a consistent increase in creativity as an adult on these tests. And one of them was, I think, an hour and a half increase in free play as a child would have predicted an increase in creativity as an adult. You know, when you get thousands of data points, you can look at things very quantitatively, and
right.
you can make those quantitative predictions. So I thought that was really fascinating.
Well, in the sports arena, at least we have this idea, and you may say, oh, yeah, there's research on this, and I'm just not aware of it, of players who play a variety of sports. And you and I were talking about this before I started recording about Patrick Mahomes, the Kansas City Chief quarterback, who's just, he's kind of taken the league by storm in a lot of ways. Well, he was a multi-sport athlete. He was a very good basketball player in high school. And, people who've watched him more than I have talk about his reaction to things. They go, God, he sometimes looks like a basketball player out there. And it's like, well, he was. And he carried that over in that creativity of the agility, that responding to a stimulus and acting appropriately. Well, he had many more dimensions to do that in very different areas as well. And basketball is in such a confined space that you learn that stuff, and then you put them on a football field, and all of a sudden, it's wide open space. But you can sometimes see that in that creativity, or even just they're playing around for a little bit and messing around and and doing things. I played tennis as a kid, and we would mess around. I would mess around with shots behind the back or between the legs. I saw somebody do it at Wimbledon, and stuff. But at some point in time, I pulled one of those off in a match. I didn't think about it. No coach ever told me, hey, today we're going to practice your between the leg shot.
Right.
And stuff.
Right.
But I did it
I
because
think that's
we goofed around. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And you can have, for every Patrick Mahomes, or there was data on the New England Patriots who won the Super Bowl over the Atlanta Falcons, a monumental game. I think it was something like 97. I'm sorry about that.
Way too soon.
But it was something like 97% of them were multi-sport athletes through high school. Okay, they did not specialize in football. A study on professional baseball players said the same thing. Olympian medalists. I mean, there's been research on not just Olympians, but Olympian medalists, international medalists. They come to their sport later than people who don't medal, and they were participating in multiple sports for longer. And that means usually through 15, 16. Age 15 and 16. Okay, so when I say later, I'm not saying 8. I'm saying 15 and 16. And this is documented. This isn't right. Exactly.
Come on.
This is not a fly-by-night finding. This is so consistent. In fact, one of the most consistent things that go completely against what some people out there will say, that you have to specialize early. Absolutely not. It's completely counter to your success if you do. And of course, playing all year round and things like that. But what you mentioned too was the cognitive flexibility that you get from playing two different sports. And sometimes it's obvious if you play badminton and volleyball, they're both net sports, they both have the same strategy, things like that. But if you play soccer and volleyball, then there's other more disparate cognitive connections that you can make about space on the field and spacing yourself out and being prepared for where someone is going to hit the ball. All of those things benefit you in the long run for, of course, having fun, hitting a ball through your legs. How can that not be fun? And also for actually
I can tell you one way it's not,
sport.
but we won't get into that.
Oh, well, yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's probably true. And that's why I guess you have to practice.
Yeah, that can be challenging. No, good. Yeah, I think this and again, when we were talking about this, how do we combat this? We know this. A lot of high-level athletes are on their soapbox about this. Kobe Bryant at Project Play talked about it. He grew up playing soccer because he grew up part of his life in Europe. And, every kid plays soccer in Europe. But playing soccer may just mean going out and you're kicking the ball around the street with your friends or not even a ball sometimes. It's whatever you make that is sort of like a soccer ball that doesn't even bounce normally. Wow, what do you learn in that when you learn how to handle bad hops on a ball that's made out of tape or whatever it may be? But
yeah, exactly.
We made those as kids. But how do we combat that when? And I said this earlier, but beforehand, I'm troubled by the appeal to authority, where just because somebody has a name that we automatically think they know what they're talking about. But so much of what we
have,
you know
that works.
I know it does. That's why my argument is, well, let's combat their, the club coach who's telling the kid, he needs to play baseball year round if he wants to do this, and he's 10 years old, and club coach, maybe he played in college. That was the peak of it. Maybe even high school in some cases. In one case I know. And then I watched John Smoltz, Hall of Fame pitcher from the Atlanta Braves. I grew up a Braves fan, so Smoltz is near and dear to my heart. And during his Hall of Fame acceptance speech, he basically said, stop playing baseball year-round. And not just for pitchers, which tends to get the focus because of the Tommy John surgery stuff, but stop. Okay, I got the baseball coach, topped out in junior college, and I got John Smoltz. It's like, why are you not listening to John Smoltz if you're going to rely on the authority of this person? I'm going with John Smoltz. He's seen more baseball than I will ever see if I keep watching the rest of my life. Yeah. So anyway, how do we? I think. Well, how do we do that?
Yeah. How do we turn the ship around?
How do we solve this problem?
I think, to be honest, 10 years ago, John Smoltz and Kobe Bryant weren't speaking out. And so now they are. And so that's a difference, and that's a positive change. The ship has really gotten a lot of steam forward. So to turn the ship around is going to require everybody. And I'm very happy to see, Project Play and the Aspen Institute and all of these wonderful organizations getting out there and finding the names, Kobe Bryant, John Smoltz, whatever, that does matter. People do respond to that, and there's a lot of data to support that as well.
Yes.
And so that's good. But I want, in my last chapter in the book, is the future of children's sports. And it has actual suggestions for parents, coaches, sport administrators, and researchers, okay? Because it's going to take all of us to turn the ship around. But I want parents to know particularly how much power they have. They have the power of the purse, of course, of what they pay for or not, but they also have the power of the ask. Show me the data that says that my child needs to start playing baseball all year round at age 10. Show me the data. And there are none. So when parents start to question people who have a financial interest in saying what they're saying, then that's going to maybe have the people question themselves, maybe have the sport administrators question themselves, but also say, well, why should I believe you? When Kobe Bryant says the opposite or John Smoltz says the opposite, maybe it's going to be that sort of conflict. But pushing back, saying, I'm not sure, I've heard that this isn't good for my child. Show me where you say that you can make my child an Olympian, of course, or something like that. Coaches, I mean, you're in that. There's a lot of wonderful coaching education and coaches training. Still, the overwhelming majority of children's coaches are volunteer parents. And so trying to get organizations to make sure that volunteer coaches are educated about children's development, educated about bringing fun to sport. That's the only thing that's going to keep children in sport. Skill is secondary. So fun is going to be that. Having coaches, you basically, read the literature, take a couple of classes on coaching children, not coaching college kids. Sport administrators, there's an entire section in my book on what they can and should be doing and which would not hurt their bottom line at all. If you assure quality adult leadership, that's one of those things. That's not going to hurt your bottom line. If you offer opportunities to athletes of all skill levels, not just elite athletes, you're doubling your bottom line.
Right.
If you provide data about, or if you provide your goals and objectives right out, on the door frame, and say, here are the data that show that we are increasing kids' interest in sport, all of that, program evaluation, adjusting schedules so that parents don't have to be the Uber drivers, that you don't have to practice every day, you don't have to have games during the dinner hour, for instance, providing dietary information, emphasizing sportsmanship, all these things that sport administrators, who probably have the most control at this moment in time, things that they can do that will not hurt their bottom line, but could bring more kids into sport at lower competitive levels and just have fun with sport. And then, of course, the researchers, I'm in that category. There's a lot of places, even though, my book is full, very dense, of the research that has happened to this point, there are a lot of places where we could be pursuing things, and one of them, which is of interest to me, is the question of race and children's sport, and our encouragement of, particularly of African American kids, to the exclusion of their encouragement for other things, and then of course vice versa. And so there's a lot of areas where there are untapped variables that I think we should be looking into as well, of how our country tends to push sport to and away from certain kids.
Yeah, that's one that I don't see to address very often. I think there's sort of a little bit of that with the look at the socioeconomic breakdown.
Right.
At some point also kind of bleeds into that area as well. In doing that, and that's certainly an issue that with the early specialization and finding coaches who are going to, I find it pretty funny when the 11-year-old is going to a strength conditioning class at some place, and I go, 11?
Oh, yeah. Right. Right. Well, they don't even have the testosterone to build the muscle. I mean, it's so ridiculous. You had actually posted on your newsletter an article written in the Atlantic about American meritocracy killing youth sports, and talked about socioeconomic status, and we're asking the people, basically middle class and upper class, we're siphoning those kids off and giving them extra training and things like that, and we're leaving everyone else behind. And of course in America, race and socioeconomic status is confounded, and so if you're talking about socioeconomic status, you're talking about race and ethnicity as well. And so there's a lot of places where we could be doing better for all of our kids, and that's one of them that hasn't been tapped as much.
Yeah. What bothered me about the Tawa article was that it really wasn't talking about meritocracy, because meritocracy to me is, if you're good, you'll get promoted, or you'll get more awards and stuff. But it's like, no, this was about buying access. There's nothing meritocracy about that, because if it were a meritocracy and you saw the 8-year-old is really good at tennis, well, it wouldn't matter if they can afford it or not. They would get the opportunity to do it. And there are cases where that happens, where organizations will have scholarships, and not the right word for it, not academic, but they'll have grants and stuff to we want these kids to come in and do this. The local youth running group that I'm on the board of, to be fully disclosure, Land Sharks, wants every kid to have the opportunity, so they raise funds so that they can offset the cost, so that parents who want their kids to join the program can do so. And there's a lot of places out there who do wonderful stuff like that, and I think we should be promoting them as much as kind of knocking this other part too, because there are opportunities out there for folks, but maybe it's not the most glamorous looking place. The boys and girls clubs that I've been into are not everything's bright, shiny, and new like the place down the street that's trying to get $100 a month out of your kid, or out of you. Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. Well, cool. Well, I want to kind of coming to the end here. I do want to wrap up something, and again, I'll put a link to the information on your book and how to get it as well. Anything you want to bring up that I didn't ask you about, something you're really passionate about and want to make sure that, the coach educators and their administrators who listen to this, what you would want to share with them?
Well, I think actually you did a wonderful job, Sam, of gathering across a whole book of all the wonderful points that can be made from the research in this area. But I think for both parents and coaches, and most people are both at some point, I think what I want to convey to some of them is that your intuition is right. What's happening on the ground here, all the myths that are being promoted and the over-organization, yeah, that's problematic. Your intuition is right, that this isn't the way it was when I was a kid, and that doesn't make it good or bad, but the data show that what we're doing is not necessarily healthy for our children. And so, whether it's being promoted from my book or just looking at the research, tens of thousands of data points don't lie. An anecdote is an anecdote, and I'm not going to say, oh, this is true because Kobe Bryant says so. Absolutely not. But tens of thousands of data points don't lie, and so that's the professional research is supporting a lot of parents and coaches' intuition that this is not only not good, but actually bad for kids' psychological and physiological development. So, I think that's really one of the things that has come up over the years that I've been writing this book, is that people have said, I feel in my gut that this isn't right, or this coach said this, and I'd like to support that negative intuition that people have had actually is supported by data.
I find it interesting you say that because, there's a constant or, pretty regular kind of little meme thing that pops up from time to time about how, I rode in cars without seat belts for, I don't know, many years.
Right.
I rode in the back of pickup trucks. I did the jungle gym where, we were 8 feet off the ground and I survived all that. And, and so I see that a lot of times, and it's really funny because the thing I thought of was but the way we played sports was not the way that people are having their kids play sports now. But, we turned out okay. So why is it that we're looking at, not wearing a seatbelt, we made it okay? And now the truth is a lot of people didn't make it, but, and
right. I think that's the difference, and I think that's right. What a small thing is, a seatbelt is actually a small thing that has given us enormous health and safety in cars. And there were, as you know, people died by going through windshields and things like that. And so that small change that didn't cost anyone's restriction or lack of creativity or moral development or leadership skills or anything, just that little click was a really small thing, and it has an enormous payout.
Right.
This thing that we're talking about, this change, is a really big thing with no positive payout. And so I think when people say, I survived a lack of seatbelts, well, as you know, not everyone did. And so that's very much worth the second and a half of inconvenience of putting that across your lap. And yet this thing that we're talking about, this monolith that is organized children's sports, is, what was the quote? $17 billion in that article, $17 billion industry. That's really big, and the payout, we're not seeing it.
Yeah. Well, and if anything, there looks like there's lots of negative payouts to this. So the kids, aren't surviving this. They're dropping out and having bad experiences. In which case, there are potential ties to that with, obesity later on because you're not active. And then, there's a social aspect as an adult of playing in sports leagues. And if you haven't, tried some sort of sport, then you may never want to go join the, adult soccer league because you've never done a sport where there's lateral movement involved or a ball involved or things like that. And, And so it narrows the world that that person can go into, and maybe even narrows that kid's world down, because if I didn't, if I didn't play something or know something about it, maybe I don't take my kids or ever expose them to it. And
right.
And one of the great things I'll say about many of my colleagues in the Olympic world is that we're in the sports world, so we have exposure to so many sports that I see a lot of my colleagues who have kids who were exposing them to sports because they take them to something because, hey, I know somebody who works over in that sport. Let's go watch, bike racing at the velodrome.
Mm-hmm.
And because they know about it, for one thing, and with it. So I think that exposure part is pretty important with that.
Right.
Well, cool.
And just to have that fun associated with that exposure. If your only exposure was being yelled at by a coach when you were 8, or being told to run drills as a punishment, if that was your exposure, not surprisingly, you're not going to go back to sport for fun. But if it was fun, even if you weren't the best on your team, even if you didn't go on to make varsity in high school, but you really loved basketball and it was fun, and that you go to the Y and you play with the guys. No one yelled at you. No one. So it's not about making Olympians. They'll find their way. Their genes and their work ethic will find their way. This is right. This is about keeping the American children interested in activity and sport and play and learning the things that you can learn from sport, and organizing yourself.
Well, I want to go on this about the coach, yelling at you and stuff. I read an essay a long time ago. Sorry, I can't remember who wrote it. Talking about why kids are attracted to video games, and one of the points that this person suggested as a reason is there are no adults yelling at them about, you got killed, now I want you to do 50 push-ups and stuff. The kids are there, and I reset the game, and I try something else. I go through that door, and this time I looked right, and I got killed, so next time I'm going to look left, and they're learning on their own, which, that gift of failure thing, I encourage everybody to go back and listen to Jessica Leahy, my interview with her. Talking about it is great, and there's no adult yelling at them. There may be somebody online that they ask, hey, I need some help, but they're also the ones initiating that question on there. And now that could be an 8-year-old or it could be a 38-year-old. You don't know who it is necessarily, but there's that world. Right. And then more in the sports thing, I saw a piece over Thanksgiving on a channel talking about the 80s. And it may have been CNN, but I think it was another channel. But Tony Hawk, the skateboarder, talks about there were no adults around. We were trying tricks out, and we were just trying them out. And who could do the best trick? Oh, he did that. Oh, cool. Let me see if I can do a 360. He did that at 270. And there was nobody there coaching them how to do it. They probably helped each other out a little bit. And hey, you need to come in and do this or something like that, or when I do it, or they're just watching over and over. And there's no one coaching the skateboarder on how to do that trick. And they're just trying to one-up each other and do that. And
it comes from within. Yeah, it comes from within. I think that's where all success in sport. Exactly.
Well, and you mentioned the extrinsic stuff. I had made a note here. One of the people I'm trying to get on for a future podcast is Daniel Pink, and he's written a book about when you put an extrinsic value on something, it sucks the fun right out of it, and actually you're less likely to get somebody to do it. If your kid loves mowing the yard, which honestly I did as a kid, I don't know what it was about mowing the yard that I love to do, and at some point in time my dad said, well, I'll pay you to do this, and I remember it became a chore then.
Right, exactly.
Nothing about the activity changed. It was still mowing the lawn. Right. But now that I was getting, I don't know, the $1 or $2 he gave me a long time ago, it was a lot of money. And, all of a sudden it became a chore and work, and I was grumbling about not wanting to go out and do it. And, he probably would have been better off just let me mow the grass, and every now and then just give me $2 for, hey, just here's $2, go to the movie kind of thing, and not tying it to that at all, even if in his mind. Those rewards are interesting. Well, good. All right.
And
Well,
that's exactly what we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
With ribbons and trophies and participation ribbons. Well, fun is the reward for participation.
Yeah.
You've already gotten it. The ribbon is not. And that makes you second guess as a child, why am I doing this? I'm doing it for the ribbon and the trophy.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, it's the kiss of death for intrinsic motivation.
And the same research applies to grades too. If you start giving kids those external rewards for grades, it sometimes it seems to have a rebound effect, a negative effect on that. All right.
Yeah, and that actually, I did mention one article in my book about that goes into adulthood. That when you reward material, they call it material parenting. When you reward for sport or music or grades with something concrete, then that kid expects as an adult that happiness is linked to stuff. And that's a really interesting finding as well.
Oh, that is a good one. Yeah, linked to stuff. Well, I said a few minutes ago that we were wrapping something, and then we went about like 8 more minutes on that. But I enjoyed that. And at the end of the day, as long as you and I enjoyed it.
Always fun talking to you, Sam.
And it has been fun. We need to, we need to link up more often for sure on this. So
absolutely.
Yep. Well, with that, I'm going to bring this one to a close. And again, thanks, Kristi. And I suggest everyone go check out, buy the Adulteration of Children's Sports. Again, links will be in the show note to the discount flyer so that you have that code. And hopefully, maybe we'll see you out at the USCCE conference in June. If you can get away for a little bit and come out and visit us, that would be great.
Excellent.
Yep. And once again, thank you for your time. And everyone, have a good rest of your day. Thanks.